I usually have to stand behind after see people.
Well, okay. Are we ready to start? So you're going to press recording. Yeah. Right. So we are recording. Well, welcome to this session 3B. We've got 3 papers in this session, so each will have 20 minutes. We've got Eldad Ben-Eliezer, Cheryl Coulthard, and Stefan Lloyd-Moffett. I'll introduce each individually, but they're going to have the spotlight on them. They'll have the floor. We're going to hold questions until the end of the 3 papers, so if you can make a note of them, and we'll combine them into, we should have a time for about 15-20 minute discussion if we keep everything to time. And also we've got Julieanna Frost, who's holding the space virtually, and Amy Hart, who's going to be our Zoom chair here, Zoom Tech. I get the lingo right. So we should be able to hold everyone in the room at the same time. So I don't know if you want me to. I was giving some brief notes that you're a committed member of the Bruderhof community, and you work as family doctor and science teacher in Beech Grove community, which is in Kent in England, my own country. I won't expand on any further introduction. I'll let you take it from here through your paper. Thanks.
Okay, so get started. So I'm Eldad, as you heard, and my wife Edna in the blue dress is here with me as well. And we're part of the Bruderhof communities, which has been going for over 100 years. So based on that experience, just to talk a little bit about some of the forces, powers that make communities work and make communities fall apart, because I think that kind of understanding can help to shape decisions and growth and what happens in a community. So hopefully the slides, yes, look at that. Here we go. So the slides are mostly just pictures to give a little bit of background. Some of the slides will be pictures of our communities, and then there'll be just other slides just to give an idea of what we're talking about. So I'm going to start out with quote from my father, Joseph Ben-Eliezer. Happens to be his 93rd birthday on this very day, and some of you may have known him. So this is a quote that he very often brought up, was instrumental in his life, and so I've sort of inherited it. 2 spiritual powers in the world, that one that brings people together, and one that brings people apart. You could talk about a spiritual power or force, but there's something that builds community, and there's something that destroys community. So next. So I come from the Bruderhof in Kent, in East Sussex, in England. So we're part of an international network of community. This community is about 250 people where we live, includes families, children, elderly. We have a common work, making toys and classroom furniture. I'm happy to tell anybody afterwards more about the community itself. Picture shows my son Benjamin, who has Down syndrome, with a giant pumpkin that he grew. If you want to know how he grew it, you can ask me later. Next. So there's a lot of discussion about the different forms that community can take. But I'd like to focus really on what's behind these forms, because even the best structure can become a lifeless caricature if the life isn't there behind it. So the form we like to talk about is like a lantern. It's takes the structure, the outer, the necessary things that are there to contain what is inside. And it's important. So that's why we need to talk about what is behind it. Next. So I believe that life in community is like a living organism rather than a mechanical or physical structure. There's something that grows and blossoms. And that's why forced community doesn't work. We know the history of political communism. Likewise, I don't believe that a community that's held together just by a charismatic leader or by a set of rigid principles is going to last. And it's a basic tenet of our communities that any sort of human power or effort to control others destroys community ultimately, and it should be based on the free willing dedication of all the members. Okay, next. So we're talking about change and evolution in communities, and whether you're a young community or 100 years, it's very important. But change isn't necessarily a positive thing. So if the change is driven by the forces of self-interest and convenience, then actually it's going to destroy community. If the change is built, it will keep going. And I would say that our movement is one that has held quite firmly to the core values that started the community as a foundation that we still hold to more or less the same as when it began. But within that, we're ready to change, and we need to change. So the next one. So why do we need to change? Well, we live in a changing world, and we need to get ready to change so that we have connection and relevance to people around us. There's no point getting stuck in the tried and tested ways of the past. I'm sure we're all aware of religious and other communities in which tradition and rules have become more important than the real reason for their existence. And secondly, a communal movement that is not constantly renewed from within becomes dead and loses its way and dies out. So part of this renewal means being ready for change. So the natural world shows us that substances and living things eventually disintegrate and decay. One of my jobs is teaching chemistry to teenagers. We talk about entropy, or the law of disorder, which provides a convenient explanation for the state of some of their rooms. But just as molecules break down and wood rots, communities are subject to powerful forces. Disintegration, as my father said in my opening quote. And I think it's important to take these on board. I think we often underestimate how powerful these forces are. So I'll start by addressing some of those before we go on to the things that bring the community together. Next. So this slide shows how work has changed in the 100 years of our communal history, simple farming through to high-tech manufacturing. Technology has a lot of positive aspects, there's no denying that, but it does have the tendency to lead to isolation and the loss of joy of working together. Next. So face-to-face communication is critical to building healthy communities, and this is being steadily eroded by the use of smartphones and digital media, which of course we know have many advantages, but these power to disrupt genuine heart-to-heart relationships between the members and with the wider world. And in our communities, we try to resist using universal smartphones, but basically we've succumbed to that now. And it's a struggle. We do not want this to undermine community. So we'll see what happens. Next. So entertainment is an area that's important. Also, digital entertainment can easily undermine community, whereas things like singing and reading, playing together, which are very important to us, they build relationships. It's much easier to watch a movie than to play an active game. And this is something, again, that we're struggling with. Next. So the founders of our community lived very poorly. They're scratching out a living from the land. Now we have successful businesses, which allow us to live much more comfortably and independently. But the dangers of materialism, I think we're all aware, lead to self-satisfaction, to apathy, or even jealousy. And these are destructive forces that can undermine community. Next. Society is becoming increasingly polarized, I think, whether it's in terms of politics or liberal or conservative or religious or secular standpoints. And in polarization, we can clearly see this force that tears people apart. And you may think that in a community like ours, this isn't a problem, but it is, even if there is shared commitment and beliefs, it's easy, the internet, to get sucked down a rabbit hole, to read one-sided information that confirms your biases, and then that can lead to an erosion of trust. Next. So more than at any time in history, we live in a me-centered society. The rights and wishes of the individual seem to trump everything else. So clearly each person needs to be valued and treated with dignity and respect, and allowed to be themselves. Very important. But unless I'm ready to sacrifice my personal wants for the good of the whole, I will destroy community. So we talk about community give rather than community take. And individualism is a problem that we have to deal with. So next. So enough about some of the forces of decay. What about the opposite? What brings communities together? The reason why we live in community, because we realize there's life and joy and abundance and creativity when people come together to build a common vision. And if we allow it to work, the power that gathers is stronger than the power that divides. So this picture shows a group of young people in our community in the middle of New York City, coming together to sing and be strengthened by each other's presence. Next. Seems obvious, but the more reasons and opportunities we can find to gather, the stronger our community, and the more we can embrace necessary change. So communal singing, work, eating, playing, discussion, worship can all be part of this. And again, it's easy to find ways to separate, and it takes an effort, we have found in our communities, to constantly find ways to gather. Next. So working together is where community becomes real. We find that when you work together, tensions arise, which is good because then you have something to work on, you can solve, and you get to know each other better. And you have real tangible results of your work, which you can celebrate. And a communal work environment in which each plays their part and all are valued equally is much more than just a source of income. It's an expression of what motivates us. So on the right, see my son Ben again in our factory. We're making children's toys, classroom furniture. So in our factory, we have places that where people in their 90s and disabled and anybody, guests, can come and work, and it's arranged in such a way that anybody can join in. Next. Communities that welcome children thrive. Children bring joy, connection, and vision for the future. The bedrock of healthy child development, I believe, is the family. And strong families are the foundation on which change and growth can occur. I appreciate there may be other views on this, but we have found children feel the most security when they grow up in a home in which they have a father and a mother who are faithful to each other for life. That's very important to us. Next. A key practical expression of the force that gathers is the sharing of property, time, and income between members. So all members share and give everything that they earn. Financial inequality has a devious way of entering into relationships and destroying them. And we have found that complete renunciation of personal property and income is the best basis for living together. That started in 1920 and is continuing today, both within our communities and between our various communities worldwide. Next. So this picture, you see my daughter Rebecca with a disabled young woman next to her, and they grew up together, and they don't see themselves as somebody that's disabled and somebody that's caring. They see themselves as friends and co-workers. And caring brings people together and can draw out the best in us. It's interesting that personally we don't like to be vulnerable, and yet it's just this vulnerability that allows others to feel needed. The commitment of care is one of the strongest forces that holds a community together. Next. Living community has its challenges, but joy is what makes it all worthwhile. And the more we can get together to celebrate and to laugh and to enjoy each other's company, the more we counteract the forces divide us. We find in our community that when things are getting rough, get together and we'll have a fun evening and we will just have a good time together. And it sort of breaks down some of these barriers to be able to laugh about them together. Next. So growth and renewal and change depends on seeking together. That's both within our circle and with those around us. And that's why, one of the reasons why we're here at this conference. We want to learn from others. We want to be inspired by other expressions of community. And people coming together in a genuine spirit of seeking to build community can prepare the ground for new expressions of living together. Next. So perhaps more than anything, the force that holds us together is in our community, is our faith. And to be clear, for us, faith is not about a set of rules or dogma or tradition. And it's about an expression of the love that we feel, which supersedes our personal selfish motives. So belief in a spirit that unites is not necessarily only religious. People without a professed religion, such as Landauer, speak eloquently about this spirit that is something beyond ourselves. And our life is inspired by the example of the community that resulted from the outpouring of the Spirit in Jerusalem some 2,000 years ago. So communities with a vibrant shared faith can change and adapt the expression of their lives creatively at the same time as remaining firmly committed to the cause of why they're living together. I know that I've had discussions with people who come from secular communities and they say, can't you just do this without faith bit? But for us, it's what holds us together. And so it is important. Next. So over the past 100 years, there have been numerous changes in the way we dress and travel and work. But beyond that, I want to just look at a few specific examples of evolution and change that builds on these issues of looking at the forces of gathering and dividing. Next. So most of our communities are large rural settlements, like the place I grew up, which you can see here. It's Darvel community in England, home to 300 members. These places provide opportunities for communal work, a good environment for families to raise children, options to provide care for the elderly and disabled. 300 people, 300 individuals. But large communities risk losing a sense of close community between individuals who really know each other. And we also found that the rural location can limit opportunities for interacting with seeking people. So that led us to consider other models. Next. So over the last 20 years or so, we have founded a number of smaller urban communities, like the place in London, where my wife and I spent a year and a half, which is shown on the right there. Sorry, on the left. The top right is our community in New York City. And the bottom right is from Asunción in Paraguay. Living in a city allows much more natural connection with people from other walks of life, which stimulates seeking. And we appreciated the chance to spend time with young people in London who were grappling with important issues in a more intimate way, and to spend time together to increase our faith, to deal with unpredictable things living in the city, and experience real sharing and joy. We've also found in our urban communities it's much harder to raise children and to care for the elderly or disabled, and finding communal work is much more challenging. Next. So another area for evolution for us has been education. Although we have our own schools, we used to send our children 14 to 18 years to local high schools. So on the left is the school I attended in the UK in Robertsbridge. And on the right is my school my wife attended in upstate New York. And although it was difficult at times, I found exposure to different viewpoints and values at this age to be formative, and helped me to make informed decisions for my life's direction. However, more recently, we have found that the forces of isolation and materialism were becoming increasingly strong in public schools, with all the students having smartphones and social media accounts, and values of family, caring, and work were becoming increasingly eroded. Next. Therefore, we decided to start our own schools for teenagers. So on the top, on the left, you see our Mount Academy in New York State, which has some 200 students, most of them from our own community, but a growing number from other families. And on the right, you see some students from our Beech Grove Academy in the UK, which is where I teach, only has 40 to 50 students. You see them helping in a center for refugees there. So these schools provide opportunities to teach good values for work, caring, sharing, and strengthening family and moral values. Personally, I found that the students are very open and enthusiastic and engaged, and we do our best to give exposure to other viewpoints by arranging field trips and bringing in speakers and engaging in club activities with other schools. On the other hand, I do worry that by protecting them from the hard shocks of the reality of modern life, they may have less opportunity to build the strength of character, independent thinking needed to build strong and flourishing community. So it's an area that we're still grappling with. Next. COVID pandemic brought the challenge to us, as to everyone, of protecting the elderly and vulnerable without losing our sense of community. We were forced to take drastic steps in terms of isolation, but we tried to find creative ways to interact. So in this picture, a member's 90th birthday, for which the families performed songs and dances at a respectful distance. Contact with local people during this time was quite limited, but some members helped in local hospitals, isolated from the rest of us. Thankfully, we were protected from the worst of the disease and were eventually able to return to communal activities. So although these events strengthened our realization there, some found that avoiding the effort needed for communal gathering was quite convenient, and it took extra effort and vision to reestablish interesting mystic more than the young, and this caused seek how to recreate community. Sorry, am I going over time? We're almost there. So although our communities are USA and Australia, we have always wished the same vision could ways people of other cultures. So on the left, you see a community that we helped start in Nigeria. We failed. So although we did our styles of living, working, and expressing our, possibly we did not appreciate enough how corrosive wealth, Western glamour can be on a more primitive society that does not have the same understanding. Recently, we founded a community in Korea. And that was after a long period of preparation, trying to understand the culture and working with the far. It's still going well. And I would just say that appreciating culture is a lot more than language. If communities are to thrive, they need to understand unwritten social norms that govern behavior, which can easily lead to misunderstandings, tension. So all the more one needs trust in the power of love to bridge the differences. Last slide. On a few thoughts regarding what builds community, and it'd be interesting. I think we need to inspire and learn from each other to be able to challenges of today.
Thank you very much, Eldad. We did say at the beginning that we're going to hold questions after all three papers. So we're going to just now put Cheryl into the hot seat. So that way, it's questions are later. Yeah, we're going to put it all together because there's otherwise it's not unfair because there's a creep of time. So, and I think there will be synergies between the three papers. So, I mean, you can always make a note yourself and bring it to the discussion. So, Cheryl is I don't know who else was based about you, graduate of Texas A&M in History and Gender Studies, and working at the intersections of gender, race, and class in 19th and 20th century American intentional communities. So we're going from England now, well, with some North American examples, to American intentional communities. And this is your first ICSA, so welcome. And you can take it away now. Thanks.
We want to start a new religion. This paper is about Kerista's, the Kerista community's comprehensive theory of everything. The Kerista commune is perhaps most notorious for its practice of polyfidelity, a polyamorous construct designed to eliminate jealousy and dependence created by the institution of nuclear monogamous family. Or perhaps you're familiar with advocates. Their multifaceted, wildly successful framework of companies, including a multi-million-dollar Apple computer resale business. But what's less commonly known is that polyfidelity and abacus represent just two aspects in founder Judd Pressmont's comprehensive theory of everything, which communal scholar Timothy Miller refers to as one of the most deliberately constructed religions ever. This presentation will examine how the context of Kerista's founding and the democratically created doctrines, beliefs, and practices that came out of it allowed the community to create a stable framework for the radically reorganized and reoriented society. Before getting, yeah, it's not, no, we're not, I'm not there yet, so don't worry about it. Before getting into the religion of Kerista, there's a number of kind of terms and theories to define and discuss. There are two major camps in the religious studies community regarding the defining of the term new religious movement. One group, represented by sociologist Eileen Barker, defines the term new in terms of chronology, arguing that to fit into this category, religious communities must have originated in the mid-20th century. Oh, okay.
That's why when you're there on the slides.
Well, the slides are mostly pictures to kind of give you some background if you're not familiar with San Francisco and that. Okay, so slow down. Sorry. Okay.
Is the sound like we need to put
Right. Is the sound okay for the audience, the Zoom audience?
Maybe you can summarize like in.
Okay.
It's lower pages.
Okay, sure. So basically, new religious movements, people in religious studies have some debate about it. One group says new means chronologically new. It has to have happened mid-20th century or later. The other group says new has more to do with how the community positions itself in relation to existing religions. So communities that are putting themselves directly in tension with established religions. And Kerista falls into both those definitions. It works for them either way. The community was founded in 1971. And because of its practices and beliefs, it came into conflict with mainstream society, especially about its ideas about monogamy, nuclear family, shared wealth, distribution of labor. All of those things were not the norms for 1970s America. For a definition of communal society, I'm going to again turn to Tim Miller, who defines them as having the following characteristics: a sense of purpose and distinctiveness with deliberate intent to be a community, some kind of shared living space, some shared resources, and a critical mass, a membership of at least 5 adults, not all of whom are by blood or marriage, and who have voluntarily chosen to live in community. So slide 1 is just showing you that area in red on the map is known as Haight-Ashbury. This is in San Francisco, and this is kind of what was the epicenter of the hippie movement in the 60s and 70s. So Kerista again fits into this definition of a communal society. We all know they're known by lots of different terms, and I may use any of those terms in this presentation. So this community was formed in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco by a man named Judd Pressmont in 1971. And it endured in this formation until 1989. Pressmont created other incarnations of Kerista both before and after this, but none of them enjoyed the financial and the community success of the San Francisco Commune. So I'm focusing on the Haight-Ashbury version of Kerista. Kerista developed its own vocabulary to define and explain its religion, its practices, its organization, and its goals. And I'll introduce these and define them as we go along. So slide 2. Kerista grew out of the Haight-Ashbury scene in the late 1960s in San Francisco and out of the beatnik Bohemian enclaves in New York City. No, that's not it. That's okay.
We're allowing the professional presentation I'm saying.
When it shows up,
Yeah.
it'll show up.
Yeah.
So Judd Pressmont and okay, so that's just giving you an idea of what that area looks like for anyone that hasn't been there. It's very bohemian, it's very colorful, the businesses are what you'd expect from a hippie culture. Judd Pressmont and Eve Birchgott, who is also known as Even Eve, co-founded Kerista in 1971 upon ideals of economic communalism, democracy, and equality, using structures such as polyfidelity and mutual criticism to achieve these goals. Judd, also known as Brother Judd, proclaimed himself the, quote, prophet of Kerista as early as 1956, after a mystical experience. The voice that spoke to Judd informed him that he would become the leader of a new religion. Quote, Kerista is a religion of joy and freedom, a religion without dogma or restriction, and a religion of ecstasy. For the voice had told Judd the prophet, have a ball, enjoy yourself to the utmost. Next slide. During the 1960s, counterculture groups regularly explored spirituality and non-Judeo-Christian religious influences in search of a more satisfactory answer to world problems than those that were provided by mainstream American religious institutions. This was by no means a novel phenomenon. It was not a new thing. Back in the 18th and 19th century, people like Thomas Jefferson and the Transcendentalists looked to the East to seek new solutions. But from the late 19th century until the mid-1960s, this was much more difficult. The American government put strict limits on immigration from Asia, starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. And then the government revised this Immigration Act in 1965. And when this happened, it allowed many Americans to seek out spiritual guidance from Indian gurus, Buddhist monks, and Eastern writings that hadn't been available before. Judd's religion of Kerista borrowed heavily from these traditions and pulled on the utopian threads of earlier communities and thinkers to shape his ideas. While Judd created strict and extensive rules about living in Kerista, his religious musings appear far more vague and esoteric. Although these teachings underpin the standards of Kerista, apparently not all members accepted Judd's religious thought. Kip Seeks, one of the members, is the editor of the Kerista Commune website, and he noted on his introduction to the website, quote, "I am abridging the complete glossary to focus on terms with relevance for non-Keristans and avoid the religious and world plan mumbo jumbo." Judd's vision of heaven was of an island inhabited by Keristans living together in, quote, "humor, equality, liberation, and love." Unquote. He seems to posit a quasi-millennial view of his utopian communalism ushering in a new age as a messianic force.
Could you?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that better? Okay. So the details of how this is all going to come about and what it would look like are a lot less clear in his writings. Judd was very good at these grand philosophical plans and ideas, but not so great at the nitty-gritty about how to make it happen. So Kerista published many magazines and pamphlets. They're unusual for a hippie community in that they left a lot of printed matter behind. And they refer to the Kerista consciousness as a confederational theology that acknowledges the interconnectedness of human experience and draws on this as a basis for creating a new social order. The progression towards a new world order, according to Judd, begins with the formation of BFICs, the removal from mainstream society to form a communal group, the application of Keristan energies to philanthropic outreach, including education, arts, ending world hunger, ending poverty, ending crime, and curing mental illness. Obviously, huge plans for a community of 30 people. From the Kerista glossary, a BFIC is short for a best friend identity cluster. It's the formal name of a Keristan family. So they had the community, and within that there are subgroups. And these subgroups are, well, they started with a group originator, and they could grow supposedly to 36 people, although they never got that big. And each member joins the group with a current intention of lifetime involvement and a non-preferential feeling of deep affection for all members. So the idea was these smaller groups, these BFICs, were non-preferential relationships. So they were essentially in a relationship with everybody else in that group. So it might be, say, 8 or 10 men and women. And it was non-monogamous. And their idea was that by having non-preferential relationships, you're committed to the community and you're not going to have jealousy. Now, of course, in reality, people are people. People get jealous, and that caused a lot of conflict. For the BFIC, the Keristan Planetary Peace Plan would move society towards the ideal. Unfortunately, there's little evidence that Kerista actually succeeded in eradicating these social problems. Now, within his religion, Judd offers respect and tolerance for other religions and acknowledged that they serve a purpose to their followers. He described a supreme being who was, quote, all-knowing, omnipotent, pantheistic, non-corporeal, and benevolent, called Kerala. Even Eve published a comic book called Far Out West, in which she referred to Kerista as a Black hippie goddess and a sister to Jesus Christ. Judd and Kerista explicitly described their vision as utopian and linked it directly to the historical precedents of 19th century communities, including Robert Owen, Neshoba, Oneida, Fourierism, and Marxist writing on utopian socialism. Kerista viewed all of these experiments as establishing the foundations for living in harmony and eliminating economic inequality and creating a society in which all were equal. And they sought to build on these foundations adding their non-coercive version of Oneida's complex marriage to develop a model like that of Fourier that could spread to create a global movement. Kerista further looked to 20th century utopian influences as diverse as the kibbutzim movement in Israel and the science fiction work of Robert Heinlein. Kerista's polyamorous sexual practice was influenced by Heinlein's science fiction novel Stranger in a Strange Land, in which the Martian-raised human, Michael Valentine Smith, founded the Church of All Worlds, preached sexual freedom and truth of all religions, and is murdered by narrow-minded people who are not ready for freedom. Other Kerista documents reference Aldous Huxley in his book The Island, and Austin Tappan Wright's Islandia as negative influences, in the sense that the Keristans viewed technology as necessary for utopia rather than dangerous development. Thomas More's utopia also formed a vision for Kerista to react against, in this case to More's anti-democratic ideas. While Judd's ideas on utopia moved towards voluntary democratic communalism, he drew on past utopian threads to attempt to learn from their mistakes and build upon their successes. So Judd originally had been in New York City after World War II. He was an Air Force veteran, and he joined a beatnik anarchist community there. And they really had no rules. It was very unstructured. It was a free love community. And from this, he learned that anarchism sometimes can be a very difficult system to make work in practice. So when he and Eve were creating Kerista, they moved far in the opposite direction and created a really strict plan for living together. Most of the members were educated, white, middle class, and disgruntled with mainstream values. They came from a background of experimentation with alternative lifestyles, including communalism, open relationships, drug use, and cooperative economics. Even Judd believed that rigid rules structuring the community and the relationships were key to avoiding conflict and helping them transition to this alternative lifestyle. And while many communities, many religions have some variation on the 10 Commandments, Judd took it way beyond that. In 1973, they had 26 rules. By 1983, they had 84 standards, and that just continued growing. And they had oral traditions, oral rules that weren't written down beyond that. So some of these standards were basic to group living, such as number 18, clean up your own mess, or number 19, nonviolence. However, the rules went into considerable detail to control members' sex lives, their personal relationships with other members, and even their beliefs and emotions. So that Judd moved from anarchism to this very oppressively restrictive rule system maybe reflects his assertion of leadership and privilege within the new tribe. In the old tribe, he was one of a group of anarchists. Here, he was the guru, the supreme leader, the religious prophet, and some of those. So he was perhaps feeling more in a position to assert these rules over his leaders. As Kerista developed its belief system, beginning with Judd's initial revelation, they merged the concepts of religion and philosophy. Quote, religion is a unified, cohesive body of belief connected to a specific pantheon of sacred names, rituals, mythology, and spiritual activities. This religion, Kerista, provides a way to experience mystical ecstasy without sacrificing rational intellectuality. So even though they were a religion, they very much believed in rationalism and learning from mistakes. Rationality formed a critical part of how they understood itself. They described their form of utopianism as scientific, and their community as an experiment, with the understanding that, yes, they would make mistakes and they would learn from this, just like a scientific experiment. To outsiders, Judd asserted that the Presmont Plan is a sensible spiritual path and a clear methodology which will take us from where we are today to where we want to go tomorrow. So when he was promoting it to other people, it was no head in the clouds dreamers. It was very much a We're organized, we have a plan, and this is how we're going to get there. The foundations beyond these 88 standards were which was a form of mutual criticism, participatory democracy, economic communalism, and polyfidelity. Therefore, the religion of Kerista really affected every aspect of the members' lives. Gestaltorama formed the physical or psychological underpinnings of the religion and of how the community functioned. So it incorporated Kerista's interpretation, very loose, of Fritz Perl's Gestalt theory, mixed with the work of Abraham Maslow, Karen Horney, the mysticism of George Gurdjieff. But it differed a lot from real Gestalt in that the Gestaltorama failed to be inclusive and non-judgmental. It leaned more towards the kind of self-criticism that was popular with left-leaning Marxist groups in the 60s. Basically, they got everybody together in a group setting, and the idea was to work through community problems, or maybe if somebody had a beef with one other member, it was a chance to work on personal failings. Okay, because I slowed down so much. But basically, it turned into a way to bully people, to attack them, and Judd in particular would go after people, particularly as he was aging and there were young men being brought into the community, and because sex was such an important part of their way the community bonded, that created a lot of insecurity for Judd, and he took it out on young members. Beyond the ritual practice of Gestaltorama, they used sacred names, rituals. They used a Ouija board to ask questions of the divine and to receive guidance. I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of this, but you can go to the next slide. And just to give you a picture of, there's Kerista. Here it is, the goddess. I'm going to skip over because I slowed this down a bit. Sorry? It's a star. Yeah, it's a star there. Well, and they were incorporating lots of different religious and philosophical beliefs and kind of pulling them all together. But they believe that basically we don't have true free will. Everything is predetermined, but we should still act as though we have free will because we don't know what's been decided for us. And that so we're morally responsible. And that we're just really what they described as a small detail in the cosmic opera. Ultimately, Keristan religion served the larger utopian goals of Kerista to create a world more peaceful and egalitarian where everyone had their needs met. While the community had huge plans for global philanthropy and encouraging social and personal growth, Kerista's influence proved to be much smaller than its dreams. The population of Kerista Commune in San Francisco peaked at 30 members. Internal conflicts, largely stemming from Judd's authoritarian tendencies, caused the community to break down and eventually collapse in 1991. Like many communities, Kerista failed to live up to the standards and ideals they had created for itself. The gap between the rhetoric and the reality of life at Kerista grew unbridgeable. After Kerista's breakup, Judd attempted to carry on with his plans. He never managed to achieve the growth or enthusiasm that the community attained in Haight-Ashbury. Next slide, please. That's just an org chart of all their different organizations and the things that they were planning. You can see it's pretty extensive. Next slide. The man with the white beard is Judd, and you can see he is much, much older than the 20-something women that were largely in the community. And then, so this was one of the tensions in the community. New religious movements, communal societies often occur together in a symbiotic relationship. A communal society provides an incubator of like-minded people working together that allows a new religious movement to be nourished and grow before attempting to proselytize to a larger audience. Similarly, a new religious movement offers a communal society a set of ideals, beliefs, practices, and rituals that provide a stabilizing and binding agent, often contributing to greater longevity for the community. Despite this synergy, religion can be polarizing for intentional communities, particularly as it ages, newer members feel less connected to the founder and to the original belief system. Communities that adapt and charismatic leaders that provide for their eventual death and replacement endure better than those who remain rigid and unwilling to consider changing circumstances. Authoritarian charismatic leaders that refuse to relinquish power as they age and become less able to command their following often find themselves in immunity. This is what happened at Kerista and for Brojad. And while 20 years is a respectable time for a communal society to endure, Judd's insistence on controlling the lives of community members ultimately led to Kerista's dissolution and its inability to reach the lofty utopian goal it set. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, and thank you for professionally gliding through the changes in pace and all the rest of it. We do have a challenge with 3 fascinating papers that we are going to pull together in discussion at the end, but I'm going to move on now to Stephen Lloyd-Moffett, and I'm going to hand you this. This is going to be your microphone. So Professor of Religious Studies at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I'll let you introduce yourself with your paper. Right.
Sure. Do we want to stand up for just 1 second and stretch? I was told that I was told that the brain can only process what the butt can stand. So let's do real quick. Okay. Okay, are you doing the? Okay. So how many people have seen one of the 10 documentaries on either WeWork or NXIVM? Oh, okay. So this will be interesting. I would say among my students, they've seen them all. They're the #1 documentary on Netflix and on Hulu. So, okay, I know where we are then. I have to say, when I teach my students about gurus, it's usually really fun because I get to talk about dancing with Prabhupada or cosmic consciousness with Alan Watts or, the utopia of the farm or Jim Jones. And I recall coming home one day from teaching and saying, I don't think any of my students would fall for a guru now. They, just seem so outlandish. And my partner, Amy, in the back here, said I was wrong. And I'm here to publicly admit, as most partners are expected to do, that I was wrong and my partner is right. Gurus still exist. They have just sort of changed form. And I'm going to look at 2 sort of social, psychological, spiritual movements that spawn communal living, and that are different from many communities in the past, but are worthy of being studied on their own. The 2 movements are not explicitly religious. The social movement that stemmed out of WeWork, founded by Adam Newman, called WeLive, and they were sort of a urban communal living consortium. He called it an urban kibbutz. The second example is a self-improvement movement by Keith Raniere called NXIVM, and their community that was created outside of Albany, New York. Neither movement is around today. Newman is a disgraced but wealthy former entrepreneur, and Raniere is spending 120 years in jail for multiple crimes. But 5 years ago, these were 2 of the fastest growing movements in the United States, both promising new ways to live and new ways to live communally. And while both these movements are different from each other, in style and scope, they have this unabashed optimism in the marriage of capitalism and community. They both sought to untether communalism from the echoes of socialism, where it wasn't just wrong, it wasn't just like, capitalism was okay, but rather capitalism fuels community and community has a symbiotic relationship with capitalism because only community can make a check on the excesses of capitalism. So ruthless yet socially responsible capitalism through community was the utopian vision being sold by both of these leaders. Both movements end up crashing spectacularly, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you the story of each of these movements first. So let's start with WeLive and Adam Newman. The communal living situation called WeLive was founded in 2015 as a subsidiary of WeWork, which was a large shared workplace business started by Adam Newman and his partner. It was WeLive was a series of upscale communal living in hip neighborhoods, initially in New York and Washington, D.C. They provided shared studios, private studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartments with shared communal kitchens, common space with unlimited beer and unlimited coffee. They had an internal social media site where you could text each other in the building. The rooms were intentionally tiny, and the design was designed so that people had to run into each other. I also would note that the tiny rooms maximize revenue because you could fit more people in a small space. There was a hot tub on the roof. The laundry room here was also the game room. And there's a full-time concierge team, which organized events like movie nights, cocktail hours, formal and informal meals together in the communal kitchen. The design aesthetic was, to quote a Forbes article, actually one more, babe. I think this might be the, oh, baby, I think you picked the old, you picked the wrong one. Sorry, go back. There should be a second one. Should be a second one. That one. Yeah. Keep going down. Okay. To quote, there it is. To quote, there you go, baby. You got it. Okay. To quote Forbes, WeLive aesthetic is a blend of reformed bro meets upscale IKEA with a bit of modern design thinking sprinkled on top. On the walls were motivational sayings like home is where the Wi-Fi is and home is where your pants are off. It was somewhere a cross between a cruise ship, a hipster canteen, and tenement housing. For about $3,000 a month per resident. It was about the same as other places around the neighborhood, maybe a little bit more expensive. It promised not just accommodations, but a holistic way of living. This is how their website laid it out. They said, WeLive is a new way of living built upon community, flexibility, and a fundamental belief that we're only as good as the people we surround ourselves with. We live is better when we're a part of a community that believes in something larger than itself. From mail rooms and laundry rooms that double as bars and event spaces to communal kitchens, roof decks, and hot tubs, WeLive challenges traditional apartment living through physical spaces that foster meaningful relationships. Whether for a day, a week, a month, or a year, by joining WeLive, you'll be psyched to be alive. In fact, most of the people, they wanted to look like that, by the way. It's a hipster vibe. The WeLive founders promised to raise the world's consciousness through WeLive and forever solve the challenge of loneliness that plagues modern humanity, especially younger generations. Now, most of the initial residents actually worked for the parent company WeWork, but eventually more non-WeWork people moved in. Now, the founders believed that this was going to change the world. So In 2016, they told investors that the WeWork communal living situations would grow from its roughly 100 residents to 34,000 and 68 locations in the next 2 years alone. So they plan to open 68 of these in 2 years. They thought it would generate $500 million in revenue. And one reporter said, asked Adam Newman, when is this going to stop? And he says, it will only stop when we cities rule the world. Everybody in the world is living in a WeLive. Now, they had $22 billion in financing, which makes this, I believe, the most well-funded human experiment in communal living in the history of the world. $22 billion to move communal living forward. Now, what is a billion-dollar office leasing company doing creating communal living? Well, to understand this, you have to understand the two founders, Miguel McKelvey and Adam Newman. Let me begin with Adam Newman. Adam Newman is an Israeli whose parents. What's that? Okay, he's an Israeli. When his parents divorced, he moved to a kibbutz near Am called Sderot, near Sderot. He said his time in the kibbutz was transformational. He told a reporter, the joy I felt living in a kibbutz. Down? Too loud. Okay. He said, my parents were divorced. It was a tough time in my life. The fulfillment I felt being part of the community was so real. It gave me so much strength to deal with my own personal challenges. That's always been ingrained in me that being together is better than being alone. Now, Adam Newman moved to New York City to attend Baruch University. He lived in an apartment with his sister, who was an international model. And he was shocked after leaving the kibbutz how everyone in New York didn't talk to one another. We live so close to one another, yet I don't even know anyone in my building. So he and his sister had a competition to try to get to know as many people in the building as possible, and then throw a dinner party and see who had more guests come. His sister, being an international model, won that contest. But he said, what America needs is an urban kibbutz. And so he was studying business at Baruch University. He entered into a contest for best new business idea. And his idea was to create an urban kibbutz in New York and take over the housing market. He got dead last in the competition. And his professor said, there's no money in communal living. Okay, so Adam Newman shelved his plans to be wealthy until he met Miguel McKelvey, who, despite growing up in Oregon rather than Israel, actually had a similar path. Miguel's dad left when he was 1, and he and his mother joined forces with 4 other mothers who did not have husbands to create a commune in Oregon in which they co-parented the 6 kids together, calling each other brother and sister, calling all the moms moms. None of them had dads. When Miguel came to New York, he also was shocked about how no one talked to one another. And so he runs into Adam at a party and says, we should do something about this. But Miguel was trained as an architect, not as a business person. They saw each other eye to eye, though. They are both 6'6". So literally they saw each other. They're very, very tall with each other. And Adam said, well, my professors say there's no money in communal living, so let's make money in office space. It was 2008. The recession was going on. They could buy office space cheap, and then they would divvy up the office space into little tiny offices that they would lease for hours or days or months at a time. They had glass conference rooms, unlimited free beer and wine, after hour socials. On the walls were slogans like "Do what you love, make a life, not a living," and they had a lot of different investors willing to do it. But notice how they didn't see themselves as starting a company. They saw themselves as starting a communal movement. This is how they describe their company. We are a community company committed to a maximum global impact. Our mission is to elevate the world's consciousness. We have built a worldwide platform that supports growth, shared experiences, and true success. We provide our members with flexible access to beautiful spaces, a culture of inclusivity, and energy of inspired community, all connected by our extensive technology infrastructure. We believe our company has the power to elevate how people work, live, and grow. Yeah, in their primary spaces, they would have social events. So by 2018, they were having 2,500 social events per week around the world. They were trying to create a movement. This is the number of offices, memberships they had. They call it, this was their stock valuation. Miguel summarized in an interview, our aspiration is to be a holistic support system or lifestyle solution for people who are interested in being open and connected. They had a summer camp where people could go to. This was a movement. Now, Adam Newman was the inspirational and self-proclaimed guru of the we generation, as they started to call people who lived in their housing and worked in their companies. He was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, New York Times, dozens of other magazines. And while he had very soaring rhetoric about how it's all about we, not I, his personal life didn't always follow through on that. For example, he banned unions from ever being involved in the construction or operation of any of theirs. If you got pregnant, you were fired. If you wouldn't work 70 hours a week, you were fired. While he wanted people to live in tiny rooms, he himself took almost $400 million out of the company. He had 7 mansions. He had a staff of 23 people. He had a $63 million airplane. He had an entire person who just provided pot on the way back to Israel for him. And when it all imploded, he took away about $1 billion himself. Now, in some sense, this seeming hypocrisy is also fitting for the kind of community to go back to we live. The pursuit of individual wealth, even at the expense of others, was not inconsistent with the goal of we live or we work. The we revolution promised wealth through community because they imagined that the contacts you made living with these enabled you to be rich. So in the new economy, what made money was networks. And this was the physical network that paralleled the digital network that you had. So the utopian dream was your wealth did not come at the expense of others. In fact, when you started your company, you hired the lawyer who lived down the hall, the graphic designer who lived upstairs, the logistics manager from 2 floors down, and the whole community got wealthy together. And so Newman and McKelvey were creating this sort of idea where the pursuit of wealth by each resident only multiplied the wealth by the group overall. And so when the we generation took over the world, the only losers were those who refused the community that would fuel it. This was the capitalistic kibbutz that he imagined back when he was 21. Now, as I was preparing this, there's the capitalistic kibbutz. I struggled with the question, is this even a community at this point? And so as all good scholars of community do, I turned to Timothy Miller and Timothy Miller's list of what constitutes a community. And I think all of them actually more or less could be made, except for number 2, some form and level of self-denial. Maybe you could argue they were choosing to live in small spaces. giving up money as self-denial, but they really weren't being asked to give up anything. I mean, they didn't even have to attend meetings. There was this sort of hedonistic vibe. McKelvey called living at WeLive should be an endless summer where you never have to sacrifice anything. You know, there was no common decision-making. You had a concierge like at a hotel or a cruise ship design your communal activities. You didn't even have to clean up. They had maids that cleaned up the communal kitchen. So is this really even a community? And this was part of the issue that led to its failure. When WeWork lost its financial backing in 2018, basically the funds dried up and it quickly sort of went towards bankruptcy. But what we saw within WeLive was it was already dividing up. It was dividing up among things that are not surprising. Some people were subletting their rooms on Airbnb, and this was leading to long-term residents versus short-term residents. Some people were having kids, and they were like, hey, the endless summer is not so appealing when I have a one-year-old. There was no way to sort of create to adjudicate this. There was no way to make a community. It was an attempt to be sort of this dorm room cruise ship for hipsters, and there's no way to move on. And so the two WeLive communal houses closed in 2021 without ever opening any of the 68 promised ones they did. Now, there are other similar environments, Ollie's, an inclusive tower in Manhattan. There's Commons living in the Brooklyn Brownstones. There's Nook in Oakland. There are sort of attempts to do something like this. Okay, great. Well, we're going to get to our second one here. But what's interesting about them, they haven't had these sort of formal sort of ideas, but there's more opportunities for sort of capitalism and community I can see on the forefront. So let's turn to NXIVM and Keith Raniere. So NXIVM was the umbrella organization for a self-improvement program that first founded in 1998 by the savant, self-proclaimed Keith Raniere outside of Albany in a place called Knox Woods. At the center was a self-help product called Executive Success Program, ESP, that was a sort of human potential movement. But it also spawned other groups such as Jeunesse, which was a women's empowerment group, the Society of Protectors, which was a men's group, The Source, which trained actors, Rainbow Cultural Garden, and educated youth, and then finally DOS. DOS is the most famous one. It stands for Dominus Obsequious Sororium, a secret women's society where individual women agreed to enslave themselves to other women who controlled every part of their life, eventually asking the women all to have sex with Keith. But there were nearly 60 companies under NXIVM. Each of these groups were for-profit, and people paid to attend workshops and seminars called intensives over weekends. About 17,000 people took these seminars in the US in its 20 years. And the people who were in charge of them lived all together in 50 different adjacent housing in a condominium project called Knox Woods. Now, I think what I'll do is I'll skip over much of Raniere's teachings about what made Executive Success Program works. It can get a little bit challenging because much like L. Ron Hubbard, who was one of his heroes, he loved to make up terms. But maybe just go to the next slide. If you are interested in any of his teachings, I'm happy to explain what made his teachings appealing. But the basic question for him was, why aren't you living up to your potential? He has figured out the human person in a way that no other human has, so that you will get to follow every dream and be successful at every level. So if you're interested in those teachings, I can explain them. But there are a couple elements that are important. One is if you want to reach your human potential, discipline is important. And so he developed a few ways to be disciplined. One was to give tribute to him. That is to have humility in front of the teacher. He took the name Vanguard, and his partner, his partner, Nancy Saltzman, was named Prefect. And so you began every session by bowing down to Vanguard and to Prefect, or to announcing public honor to Vanguard and Prefect. Next, you also needed a series of tools to create discipline in your life. One was creating collateral. So let's say you promise to work out every day for the next week. And how do you be committed to that? Well, at the beginning of the week, you might take a picture of yourself naked, and your coach would release that to the public if you didn't work out all week. Or you might put $10,000 in an account, and your coach gets that money if you didn't fulfill what you said you wanted to do with your life. So that's collateral. And the second was penance. So you could have established penance, like if you said, I want to not have a negative thought, and you go through a week and you have a negative thought, every day you had a negative thought, your penance might be to sleep on the floor, or your penance might be to not eat, or your penance might be. And the coach could also give you breach forms, which is if they saw you not fulfilling your potential, they could assign you penances. So this becomes important, this discipline idea. Okay. Now, in many ways, this is not too dissimilar from EST or Scientology or so many other ways. Two ways they're different. Go ahead, baby. Okay, two ways. And this, by the way, this saved the world. Raniere thought the world was going to end unless people joined NXIVM. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Two ways is different. Two ways that are different. First, the way to market this was not for NXIVM to mass market it, but to get everybody who went to the seminars or intensives to sign other people up. So this multi-level marketing, sometimes called a pyramid scheme, made it so that everybody had the incentive not just to improve their life, but find as many other people who want to improve their life. And you made money when you signed other people up. Now, that money went up the pyramid. So eventually, you know, the money went to Prefect and Vanguard. But as you get down the pyramid, a little got kicked up to the person who signed you up, and then a little bit got kicked up to the person who signed that person up. So everybody made money spreading this good news. And this wasn't bad making money, because it meant the world was healing. The world was getting better, right? So that's the first way, this multi-level marketing, sort of like an Amway of self-help. The second part about it was a relationship to wealth. Capitalism didn't stand in the way of wealth, but actually fueled the positive transformation. There's a 12-point mission statement, and this is what number 11 says. People control the money, the wealth, and resources of the world. It is essential for the survival of humanity that these things are in control of successful and ethical people, i.e. NXIVM people. I promise to ethically control as much money, wealth, and resources of the world as possible within my plan of success. So NXIVM people didn't see wealth as contradictory to community or contradictory to being a good person, but actually was required of being a good person on that way. Now, how did wealth not create a problem? Community. So in another form of We Live's We generation, Raniere's mission statement ends with, I promise to share and enroll people in ESP and their mission for my own benefit and to make the world a better place. This is Raniere. This is from 1998 to 2018. Yeah, much longer time. Yep. And so here we go back to the community around Raniere. There was a group trying to live out their best life and become wealthy at the same time, signing up as many people as possible. I'll skip over this, but Raniere's justification for this was his own legend. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records of having the highest IQ in the world for at least one edition in Australia. He has all this crazy stuff that they said about him. None of it is true, but no one bothered to check any of it. Like he was a judo champion. He didn't actually know judo. He just told everybody he was a judo champion, that he was a world-class mathematician. Nah, he wasn't that either, but no one checked anything. And it was very helpful that the heiress of the Seagram liquor fortune, Claire and Sarah Bronfman, financed this whole thing to the tune of $150 million that they used of family money to support Raniere. Now, his community, though, was based upon both this legendary figure that he claimed to be, but also they said he had otherworldly and mystical capabilities. Oh, by the way, the Bronfmans brought in the Dalai Lama to say how great Raniere was. Apparently somewhere around they made somewhere like a $10 million donation to the Tibetan government in exile to have the Dalai Lama going. But let me just talk quickly about the way the community worked at Knox Woods. Raniere imagined that he had mystical powers, and one of his mystical powers was to learn about people's past lives. So he told his inner circle that they were destined to be together because all of the inner circle had been Nazis in their previous life. So Barbara Boucher was Reinhard Heydrich, the Nazi butcher of Europe. Boucher, butcher, how else would you explain that last name? Other members were Nazi propagandists, Joseph Mengele, and Nancy Saltzman, his partner, was Hitler. And he was the freedom fighter, the leader of the savior of the Jews, he told everybody. And so he, by his own spirit, brought this community together so that all his partners in this endeavor, who notice are all women, would be able to relieve their guilt for what they did to the world by being with him. Okay. So the other way, so they were destined to be together as former Nazis and Nazi fighters. Second way they did it was they all slept with Keith Raniere. Of the 20 central people, 15 of them were women, and all of them were having sexual relations with Raniere. Raniere called sex a form of energy exchange that bound his partners together. He claimed his semen had mystical properties and that it caused women to see a blue light when he ejaculated. And the only way to be enlightened was through sex with him. This is what he called an exploration of meaning with him. He would often tell people in their past lives they had sexual trauma that only sleeping with him could heal. Okay, makes me wonder if it was more of a harem than a community, but anyhow. Let me just talk about how this all went down. Basically, Doss got him, Doss got him in trouble because he started having sex with 15-year-olds. He got raided by the FBI. He got convicted, 120 years in prison in Brooklyn. He was found guilty of all sorts of problems, and his entire inner circle are all in jail now. The closest 7 are all in jail. He still has some followers who are with him. So let me wrap this up. What do we do with these 2 case studies? In some sense, they're classic guru stories. Adam Newman was charismatic. Raniere had this legendary background that gave him a sense of authority. They both had psychological things that gave him levers of control. Hypocrisy ended up bringing both of them down in it. But what I think brings them together and what makes them actually interesting is this marriage between capitalism and community. They both were unabashedly capitalistic and didn't see wealth as standing in the way of true community. In fact, you needed community and capitalism in order to live your highest life. And so as we move forward, I think this is one of those instances of community that might find interest in the future for future generations. And Amy's right. Maybe gurus haven't all ended. So thanks.
Back and forth. Thank you, Stephen. I'm sorry to have had to. Well, we've had three very, very rich papers, and it's going to be quite a challenge. So, can I ask all the three papers presenters to sit up here? Because we're going to have to do a little bit of dodging around, and then you can be. We're going to go back and forth between the virtual community and the real community. Two of you got headsets, and one of you I'll pass between. So I'm going to run around a bit, by me being quite, I mean, we've all gone over a little bit, but by being quite ruthless at the end, we have got a reasonable amount of time for conversation. How many questions have we got lined up in the? Okay, that's fine. What I'd like to do though is raising my hands. I would like to, as we go through, try and get a mix of questions for different speakers, so it's not all to. In fairness to all the presenters, because we've held this time over, and try and make some links if possible. So can I start here first, and then you have the.
First of all, it was fascinating to be here and to hear you all. First of all, I want to ask you. You talk very quickly about how that it didn't work. Those commune or whatever, I forgot the name, in the cities. Can you please elaborate? I mean, you're talking about change and how change is a little bit it can be very can be destructive. I just was wondering. I think change is sometimes inevitable to save the community, but I will leave it on the side. If you can elaborate, why it didn't work out? You said there was some in London that it didn't work out. That it was you said it was challenging. So can you please, because I was wondering whether it's because it's far away in the cities.
No, what I was saying about the urban communities, it's not that they failed. It was
failed. Yeah, sorry.
it was that there were some advantages and disadvantages. So there were definite advantages in terms of reaching more people and a more intimate group of people. The difficulties were that it's harder to find communal work opportunities. It's harder to have communal childcare, and it was harder to care for elderly and disabled people if you have a smaller group of people. So that's what I was saying about urban communities. And so that's the reason why at the moment, the majority of the Bruderhof people are in larger communities, because those are the places that we can provide those kinds of things. But we do still think that urban communities are a good thing. And it may be that we need to have a network of both kinds. The community that I referred to that didn't work was in Nigeria. And that was where I was mentioning was more for cultural reasons. Because we were very enthusiastic and worked together with the local people. They sang and danced, and it was great, and everybody thought this was wonderful. We were having Europeans and Africans all living and working together. But what we didn't realize is that the fact that a Western person literally walks into their house means there's money, and this then caused division. It caused things happening under the table, and eventually people just trying to grab the money and run. So we, rather than be the cause of more tension, we decided to just withdraw, because we didn't want to get involved in a fight over wealth, because that wasn't our intention for being there.
One more question can I have? I just this person that you was talking about, is this religion, because I never heard about it, so I was just wondering why is it still though this religion? I don't remember the name. Is it still on? Is it no? Can I want just one more because okay, and then I will just I think it's very sad. I mean, I don't know if it's sad because what I'm hearing in the last days and a little bit more is the people need to belong. And the people need not to be alone. The people need, like it's some kind of between individualism and collectivism. We're tearing apart, and it's not. And I just thought, oh, how stupid could be those people? But I mean, it's not that. No, I'm not saying that that's stupid because I think we all. It doesn't matter if you're in a commune or in a country where there's nationalism. In a commune, it's very obvious to see. But when you live in a country that with some nationalism, you act like what Bourdieu said. You are unaware of this weapon that's making us do things that we mean to do. Like, I don't know if I explain myself right.
Sure. I mean, many of the core people, especially NXIVM, were actors and actresses and pretty famous. And so then now the media is asking them, how on earth, one thing I didn't mention, when you joined DOS, you got branded with Keith Raniere's initials.
Ouch.
And they'd be like, was there like a red flag there? Like, shouldn't you have known? And what they point out is if someone started off and said, you're going to get branded and enslave yourself, we would never have joined. But, if you just kind of start off with, hey, I want a little bit better life. And, oh, here's some tools. And here's this genius who developed these tools. And then, hey, isn't discipline, DOS and Jeunesse were all women run, even if Keith was kind of behind the scenes running it. So a women's empowerment group where women are going to control the world. I mean, this sounds awesome. But, as with many new religious movements or alternative religious movements, the media only got the end, right? Which is branding women to have sex with the leader. And that's the headlines. But there was a long process that got them there that, each step along the way may have made sense until it didn't.
Thank you. We've got one on. Is Julieanna going to?
We have an online question, actually a few, but I'll just do one right now. This is from Albert Bates. While WeLive and NXIVM were relatively short-lived, Kerista lasted for more than 30 years. What explains their longevity?
Combination of shared ideals, financial security. They were very successful. Their Apple resale business was a multi-million-dollar business, so that certainly made it easier. Sorry, it keeps looking at. I think they had because it was more democratically created in terms of the rules and the ideals, people bought into it, and there was more commitment to it. So I think all of those things contributed. And then when Judd, as he got older, became more authoritarian and more controlling of people's sex lives, particularly more abusive, then that made members start questioning other aspects of the community. And that's when it all kind of fell apart.
Was that answering to the question? Was there a two-part? I can't remember. Julianne, was that Albert's question?
That's Albert's question. And there's another one waiting, but we'll have another one from in the room and then
in the room,
toggle
yes,
back to me.
That's great. Okay, so next one in the room, yeah.
So I have to say that I'm overwhelmed from the decision to put all three of you together. In a way, I think it would create like a continuum from the live example of the community that you wrote so lively from your spirit and until the cult. And I was wondering if you can relate to the idea, what's the difference? Because from my point of view, it's not even the same. And I'm wondering what brought us even to use the word community relating to these cards. Because not every time that people are together, it's community. So that's my wondering, and I would love to.
The cult
Shall I start
issue?
with Stefan and then Cheryl?
Yeah, so I mean, the classic thing in religious studies is there isn't a difference between a cult and a new religious movement. The sort of joke is the only difference between a cult and a new religion is 100,000 followers in 100 years. That every new religion gets deemed a cult, and when it gets successful enough, nobody calls it a cult anymore. So we wouldn't see NXIVM as a cult if it's still around now and there's 100,000 people. My personal way I teach it in class is if you can run for public office without a lot of flack being thrown at your way. So like Mitt Romney's father couldn't, I mean, he ran, but he really didn't have a chance as a Mormon, as US president. But when Mitt Romney ran in 2012, no one, I mean, there was pushback, but he had a chance, right? And so I think, you know, once a new way of seeing the world gets big enough, then it's no longer a cult. That's the thing, because there's no definition of cult. A cult is just a name you call a new religion that you don't like. And so in religious studies, we don't use the term cult. So we will use new religious movement or alternative religious movement or countercultural religious movement, marginalized religious movement. I like alternative religious movement rather than new religious movement because of the time factor of it. But I mean, to play another way, I mean, if you grow up in a really strict Catholic community or Baptist, you know, you're indoctrinated day in and day out in a particular way of seeing the world. You're told what you can do sexually, not sexually. It just doesn't seem weird to us because there's 1 billion Catholics in the world. Catholics, come on, they got a lot of money.
Mormons? Yeah.
Mormons, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Stephen pretty much covered everything I was going to say, so that's okay.
Well, I think it is interesting that I'm presenting alongside these things. And I think in a way, it highlights exactly what I was saying. For example, I talked about materialism as being something that destroys community. We saw an example of idolization of materialism as something that ended up destroying community. I talked about community thriving as a living organism in which there is not control by rules or charismatic leaders. I disagree on the issue of just because a religious movement says that dictates what you can do with your sex life, that is a form of control. For us, we have very clear rules about what is allowed, but that is not a control by a leader exerting that power. That is a control by a shared belief that that is the best way to live, and a shared faith that helps us to do that.
I'm gonna go to the next. Just gonna keep this moving a little bit. Julianne, have you got the next one on?
Yeah,
I was going to ask
MPJ.
a question. Can I ask a question?
I think Julianna is okay. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
Hi, Mitchell Jones from Rochester, New York, USA. I am here in Skanderborg, but unfortunately I had to return to the hotel for some business. But I had a burning question I wanted to ask the last presenter. I'm actually really surprised that more people in the international audience didn't really know about NXIVM and WeWork, because these were huge news stories in the United States, big scandals in the news. So, I had a couple sort of related questions here. So do you think that the focus on the scandals in the US news reflects an aversion to communalism in the United States? And I also wanted to ask, so philosopher Slavoj Žižek, among others, has talked about how it's easier for us to imagine the end of the world before we can imagine a modest change in the free market system. To what extent is the capitalist communalism of Adam Newman and Keith Raniere expressions of this phenomenon, and is distrust of the state a factor in this phenomenon?
Okay, there's a lot there. I guess I'll go in order. I think, yeah, I mean, I think in part, news is competing for eyes, and the more salacious the scandal, the more people watch it, sadly. So, yeah, so, being able to talk about just the obvious hypocrisy of Adam Newman and all his homes and the way he treated people, and yet I am the we guru. And the most famous, the article that brought him down was a Wall Street Journal article called "The I in We," because he's the most I-focused person who spent his entire time talking about we and how it changed. The second aspect about capitalism, I think there is this sort of this dream that you can have everything. Isn't that what all utopian dreams are? And so, man, I can be rich and fulfilled and not lonely. Sign me up. And I think, the generation that was drawn to that just didn't have a history to say, wow, is there a problem with that? I mean, I think people in the, who lived through the 60s or closer to the 60s were like, oh, it's a little bit more complex than that. But, the 20s and 30s that were living there were like, yeah, this is great. And even now, when I've presented this before, a lot of people were like, well, Adam screwed it up, but he was basically right. Right. I mean, there is no inconsistency between wealth and community and doing this. So I mean, I think it's the more they believe it. I think the more promising the promise, or the more attractive the promise, the more people believe in it. Let me show you.
Well, I think we're going to keep this going because we've got a lot of questions stacking up. I've got Deborah next, and then there might be some more online, and we've got others here. Okay, so Deborah. So a quick question to Stephen. Do you see any ties between NXIVM and WeLive to the whole evangelical movement that focuses on prosperity mentality?
That's very gospel.
Yeah.
Getting your exercise, Helen. I can see that direction. That is really rich. The one thing though is there's no, at least in WeWork, there is certainly no God in it. Why in the prosperity gospel, your wealth was a sign of being blessed by God. And Adam would say that your wealth is a sign that you believe in community. Because if you truly believe in community, you will be wealthy. And the fact that his company was worth $1 billion on paper. Yeah, it never, yeah, on paper. I mean, in the end, he still walked away with $1 billion. But yeah, but now it's 4 billion overall. But I think he saw this as a testament to that the idea worked. And to be truthful, a lot of the people who studied said it was pretty close. WeWork still exists, by the way. It's just much scaled down, but they were pretty close to making it work. And, a few things changing, and it could. The question is whether, I mean, I didn't talk about this, but they thought WeLive was going to be simple. They thought once they opened 250 new offices in 2 years. So what's 68 apartment buildings? I mean, that's got to be easy. But what they realized is, living is just so much harder than office space. I mean, like, for example, their initial drawings had no laundry room. At the very first drawing, I believe, had no bathroom for half of them. Because, you know, in an
Small
office
problem.
building, you have one bathroom in the middle, and that's fine. But, you know, you're asking people to live there. I mean, so all their tools that made WeWork relatively successful didn't end up applying to WeLive. And they thought WeLive was going to open, I think in their initial estimate was 4 months, and it was something like 14 months before they actually got it up, which in WeWork world, if you were a week late, it was crazy. But now they just found that, and they didn't even really think about, you know, let's just provide about community. Let's just provide free beer, free coffee, movie nights, and everybody's going to be happy.
Okay, I mean, sort of, how are we do? We've got a lot in the room. How many have we got stacked up in virtual space?
None.
Okay, so no. Okay, I'm tempted to go to one more in the room so we can keep it a bit balanced. Right. So Alan was next.
Yeah, okay. I have one question to you, both of you, and one question for that. To you, I think that the point is not in this discussion, is the deep of illusion. You say that everything is common. I think the disconnect between reality and the illusion, maybe it's the point because something not make it logic. Okay, the positive attitude toward this experiences. So this is the question for you. And Eldad, I wanted to ask, what about relationship between this commune, the border, and the environment? Because in the internet era, the ability of the capitalist world to influence your communal way of life, how do you behave with this? Because I thought that you will say that the town communities, in-town communities, will not succeed because it's too inside the surrounding society. That's what happened to in Israel sometimes. And how you react to the strong influence of the environment that is definitely different.
So there were two questions. So Cheryl, did you want to go first? And then is that right? Is that right? And then,
I'm not sure.
I think that no, okay.
Can you repeat my part of the question?
It's something make the positive attitude to these experiences is, for me, it's not so logic. Okay,
Right.
so I ask.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
I ask
absolutely.
about the deep of illusion, maybe it's the point.
Yeah, I mean, I think people go into it. I keep sliding. Okay. I think people go into these kinds of communities with, you know, somebody's promising them all kinds of things. In this case, a lot of it around sex, but also living in community, sharing. They share their expenses. There was supposed to be opportunities goals as well. So there's a lot of promises made, and men were very committed, you know, very interested in these goals and committed to creating this community together. But as things changed over time and leadership became more authoritarian, people lost their commitment, and the reality of what they were living wasn't what they were promised. So they became disillusioned. Does that answer?
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here. Eldad.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood your question, but about the environment of living in the city versus living in a rural location. I don't see it as a negative thing living in the city, and maybe I came across that way. But when my wife and I lived in London, for example, I really appreciated the fact that you open your door and you're immediately with people, and it was much easier. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. So the influence of the environment on the community rather than the other way around. Yes. I mean, there is that the potential that the young people in our community, in our urban community, they all either had jobs or went to university. So they were very much surrounded by people with different views. But I think that's positive in my view, because if you're not convinced yourself of why you're there, then you shouldn't be there. We encourage our young people, we encourage all our members to have their own beliefs and their own way of interacting. But the question about the internet, I think, is a good one, because I think especially for children who are much more vulnerable, that could be a problem. And I think in our communities now, we still are at the point where children under the age of 15 or 16 do not have access to computers or smartphones. And we would hope that we could maintain that, because I think children are vulnerable and they can be influenced by things that could harm their development. I think for adults and older teenagers, they need to be exposed to other viewpoints. Yes, they might get sucked into something, but one would hope that they would also know that something doesn't stack up based on what the environment they've been raised in.
I'm going to move to the virtual now, because you've got the one there, and then we go back to the room, and let's try and keep it. Are they gone now? Oh, I think this is the worry. I don't want to lose people online because we've lost it.
There are no questions online.
No questions.
No questions. Okay, thank you, Julieanna. Anton.
Hi. I've actually got a question for all of you, but in time, just choose them. Firstly, I'm still trying to recover from the transition from the Buddha to Kerista. It was, yeah. So firstly, in terms of the WeLive, it might be the echo chamber that I live in, but it seems to me that model is exploding around the world. All the time I read of developers building a place with bedrooms and communal spaces for young hipsters, business people, single people, and paying an enormous amount of money to live that, per month for rent, and selling it as community, and like what you said here, and you sort of talked about it in the past as this is a specific example, but what I see is this model is like growing enormously. So that's my observation. Maybe that's wrong. In terms of Kerista, very specific question to Kerista and Eldad. You didn't mention drug use during the time of the community. What did that look like? Was that like all the time?
No, they had some specific rules about drug use and really controlled that. They did definitely weed. There was some drinking, but it wasn't, they weren't using psychedelics or hard drugs. They were very controlled about that. And they had very specific rules about people being tested for STDs at the start of the AIDS era. And yet there were all kinds of things that they were trying to consider people's health and ways for them to live more healthily in community.
Okay, and the final very practical question, so Eldad, are the people that join your community, and who are they? Where do they come from? Are your kids? What are the percentages of your kids that come back to the community when they join the community as adults? And the schools you mentioned, like what status are those schools? Like they're private schools, they're charter schools? Yes. Those are my questions.
Okay. So a lot of the people that join our communities currently are people like myself who's grown up in the community. But we also have a number of people who come from other walks of life. So I can't give you the exact percentages. probably at a guess at the moment, probably 70% or 80% of the people that join now are people who've grown up in the community, but I could be wrong there. Of the people, of the children who grow up in our communities, first of all, we do not take it for granted or encourage them to say that you should join or put them under any pressure at all. We'd much rather have less members who are committed than people who join just because it's nice or they're used to it. So we encourage our young people to make their own decisions. We give them opportunities to go out and experience something different. Of my own 6 children, 4 have decided, well, my youngest is Ben, who you saw with Down syndrome, but the other 5, 3 decided to join and 2 decided not to join. And we encourage both of them. I'm happy to say that the 2 that didn't join the community are doing work in other environments where they're helping people, one of them in Camp Hill and so on. But the percentage of young people that join, I don't know. Sometimes it's 50%, sometimes it's 80%, sometimes it's less. But at the moment, our communities are still growing in terms of numbers, and we do have, unlike some of the other discussion, a significant number of young people in our community still that are keeping it going.
That's the last thing about the state of obstacle, and then I'm going to have one last question.
Oh yeah, the schools. As I say, we have 2, actually 3, if you count Australia, small schools that are teaching our students from the age of 14 through to 18. They're still functioning. Our goal and vision is that they will expand and that we will have more students from outside of the community join them, so that our students can also interact with. Oh, the legal status. They're independent. They're independent schools. Non-state schools, independent.
Okay. Yeah.
One way or the other.
So Anton, I totally agree. It's exploding. And I feel like Camille this morning was just talking about how in Denmark, these things are so I totally agree. I think the only difference between something like WeLive and Common is Adam Newman clearly presented himself as a prophetic figure. I mean, he had the totalistic view, right? He imagined your work life, your home life, your summer camp. I mean, it was totally why I think something like Common is much more, less soaring in its rhetoric. But I think you're exactly right. I think if anything I took away from all the Danish stuff was just the obsession with what do we do with these corporate developers coming in, promising a new way of life like it. And I as with you, I was just like, wow, this is just like we live, and in a different country and form. So I think you're totally right.
This has to be the last one. I'm going to try and keep it really concise in fairness with the.
Okay. So I thought to be very, very concise as I can. So it seems to me that I would like to somehow maybe challenge your explanation for this. It seems to me that what drives those movements, those followers who repeat themselves. I can give you another 10 examples just from Israel. It just happens all the time, all those new movements. It's actually a search for some sort of sense of belonging. And the deeper the loneliness crisis gets, the more of this we're going to see. And my question is, first of all, how do you relate to this? Where do you put this in this context? And first and foremost, maybe it's something for us to work out from this room. What lessons can we learn as community researchers, leaders, founders, whatever? What lessons can we actually take professionally to our lives from your 2 case studies on the, I would say maybe the negative side, and from your case study on the positive side? How do we respond to the crisis of loneliness and create a sense of belonging without enslaving, controlling, all the kind of stuff you mentioned?
Thanks. That's a really powerful question to be able to bring the threads together. Do you want each one to respond really briefly to that provocation?
Sure, I would say exactly right. Belonging is, and the interesting thing about both Renewal and Adam is they said that. The crisis of the world is a sense of belonging, lacking belonging, being lonely, and we have an answer to that. So I think to the extent that they just consciously put it out there, saying, here's your problem, you lack belonging, here's your solution. I think it's dead right.
Well, I think that was going on at Kerista too. Judd was recognizing this was a problem. And I think I guess, counter to that or the solution to that is consent, democracy, equality within a community, consensus, rather than authoritarian, charismatic leader on high telling people how to live their lives.
Yeah, and I think that community, there are no shortcuts to genuine, real community. Power, structures, rules. That true community comes as a flower, as something that grows. I believe it's a spirit. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, there's a spirit that gathers, and I believe that to the extent that people are willing to be part of that, real community can happen, but it can never be forced through human sort of structures and control.
Great, thanks. We have run out of time, and I would like to include some thank yous. Thank you very much, Amy, for holding the Zoom tech, and thank you, Julieanna, for holding the space. Okay, great. It's all this hybrid stuff is quite stressful. And thank you very much to everyone for all the questions, tech team. And let's thank all of our presenters again for very provocative and next papers.
And thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's quite a long session, and I do know that we all need to stretch our legs now.
I have a question for you.
Another session.
You don't really know. Structures you have in place.